Few words come as politically loaded as the term welfare, and that word, or its less weighted alternatives, cash assistance, public assistance, is being heard more and more in discussions about Mayor de Blasio's social policy. That's because the number of people receiving cash assistance in the city has been rising. That tally, which dropped 5% in Mike Bloomberg's final year in office, is up 5% over the past year. Some fear the city is slipping back into policies that encourage dependency. Others believe the jump in welfare cases merely reflects the city treating low-income New Yorkers more fairly. Let's learn a little from two people who have covered or taken part in that debate and are joining us in the studio today. Gotham Gazette Samar Khurshid has written about recent welfare changes. Hi, Samar. And Alex Armlovich of the Manhattan Institute has analyzed them. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Let's start with you, Samar. Mayor de Blasio made a lot of dramatic changes when he took power following the Bloomberg administration, but few of them were quite as significant a shift in direction as regarding welfare and social benefits. What do those changes look like?
So the most significant changes right off the top of the system is not focusing on work-first programs, the sort of controversial work experience program, which was quite successful in bringing down roles, focus more on work rather than training and education. So they're phasing that out, and they're moving towards trying to create long-term employability by training people and giving them education programs, and work activity is still involved, but there's easier ways of doing that work while still being able to educate yourself, go to college, basic education. They changed how they counted welfare enrollment. Instead of counting it on a monthly basis, which was sort of susceptible to churn, where people could get kicked off and 25% of people would be back within a year.
Right, so you end up double counting them if you...
Basically.
Right.
So they went with an unduplicated annual count, which they say, which Commissioner Banks says, gives them a clearer picture, doesn't muddle the numbers, and that number, he says, has remained flat, relatively flat. And another thing that they did was changed how they sanctioned people. Now, the sanction reform has been backed up by the governor. There was a recent law which the governor praised, which eased sanctions, made it...
And what are sanctions for the uninitiated?
Sanctions basically were if people who were required to work didn't follow the rules, they missed an appointment or failed a drug test or missed a drug test, they could be kicked off the rolls. They could be kicked off, they couldn't participate for 6 months. And it was like a time-limited thing. Now, they've made it a bit more conciliatory. You can appeal sanctions easier, you can go to a fair hearing, and you can also, instead of being kicked off by a computer, there was an automated sort of sanction process. You have an opportunity to meet with an HRA staff member and discuss your case. So that, which led to a lot of churn, has been eased up a little bit, which makes it better and easier for people to stay on the rolls while still managing to participate in work activities.
And you mentioned HRA Commissioner Steve Banks. That's one of the big changes, too, a man who had spent most of his career as a legal aid lawyer challenging the city's system for awarding or not rewarding welfare benefits, now in charge of the agency. Alex, you've been analyzing, I guess, some of the impact of the changes the mayor has made. And
right.
What have you seen?
Right. The point about the difference between monthly and 12-month rolling statistics was brought up before. The monthly statistics are how many checks are being sent out this month, and the 12-month rolling is how many people have touched the welfare system, the cash assistance system, in the last 12 months.
Right.
So it still matters that more checks are getting cut each month. That's still an important bottom line to look at. So those statistics shouldn't be discounted altogether. Nonetheless, the interesting thing is that cash assistance is up at the same time that food stamps has actually been falling. We've seen a booming economy, and food stamps, which is a program in which more families tend to have some labor force exposure, at least one adult working at least part-time. There's something like 57% of food stamp families have at least some exposure to the labor market. That's much higher than the exposure to the labor market of cash assistance cases. And so there's some reason to think that it's the result of a change in policy, not the result of a failure to participate in the booming economy at the moment in the city. So that's basically why we're concerned about cash assistance trends, because it should be improving with food stamps as the economy recovers, and it's not.
And there was some suspicion, I believe, under Mayor Bloomberg's mayoralty, that the numbers we saw then, it was a reverse, that the economy worsened significantly during the latter part of his mayoralty, yet the welfare numbers really didn't change that much. And I know advocates at that point made the complaint that welfare was not serving people who deserved it, that the system was too punitive, that getting it was too difficult, the anti-fraud measures, too rigorous. Is what we're seeing now merely sort of the city sort of making up that lost territory, giving benefits to people who might have deserved it 10 years ago?
So to the extent that it's, I think it's relatively unlikely that it's just sort of a bounce back. Food stamps is a more responsive program. We saw that rise a lot during the recession and falling now. And so it's possible that there's some segmentation between people who are in and out of the labor force in food stamps, and people who are in cash assistance might often not participate much in the labor force at all. And so maybe that's why you see that less elastic response even during the recession, is that the people applying for it tended, it's basically that those programs were somewhat segmented in their applications. That's certainly possible.
Samar, do you feel like you spoke for your great article on GothamGazette.org to advocates on either side of this issue?
.com.
.com, excuse me. It should all be .org. Among people who would be considered on the left, is it generally agreed that the economy has improved that much? I mean, the city's poverty rate is more or less locked in where it was.
Well, going back to Alex's point, it's tough to judge welfare enrollment in parallel with SNAP enrollment, SNAP Supplemental Nutrition.
New name for food stamps.
The new name for food stamps. Because that's federally determined, it's federally funded, and there's been serious federal cutbacks in the program. And then this is the argument that people on the left and the HRA would make, that when federal cutbacks happen in the food stamp program, it's tough to gauge the city's response and how the city's people respond to that. There's been anecdotally, they say that people they don't want to go through all the paperwork for bare minimum in food stamps. So it's a tough metric to judge by. I mean, sure, definitely you can make that argument that if the economy is doing better, people should be getting off the welfare rolls. But and it's also tough to say that when the economy wasn't doing so well, welfare didn't spike. There's a lot of other safety net measures, SSI, Medicaid, stuff that keeps people from the welfare system.
You wanted to jump in.
Right, I want to jump in on the food stamps point. There's been it's important to distinguish between the extensiveness of a program and the intensiveness of it, so how much money per recipient versus how many recipients are eligible. Mm-hmm. There's been a small reduction in the benefits per recipient, but there was not a change in the income guidelines or any of the other eligibility criteria. So we have seen smaller monthly benefit payments. I'm trying to think of what exactly the number is. It's some number of dollars per month, but it's a relatively moderate. It's a relatively moderate cut. But we haven't seen a reduction in eligibility, at least. And certainly, the other thing is that under Commissioner Banks, there's been the city has specifically made an effort to do more SNAP outreach, to do more food stamps outreach, and so it's. The fact that SNAP is declining, food stamps is declining, despite outreach during the improving economy, I still think that's interesting, so long as there has not been eligibility cuts, which there have not yet. Let
me turn this on ahead a bit. There are about 1.6 million New Yorkers who live under the federal poverty line, I believe, something around that number. 360,000 people get welfare. Why do so few poor people get welfare?
I think that part of it is that in order to get, categorical eligibility for cash assistance, I think that
basically you need to be more than simply poor to receive welfare.
Right.
And you have to apply for it.
Exactly. The particular, in terms of, you said, are you saying under the supplemental poverty measure or the traditional
no, that's a straight one.
FPL? Because that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of cases, it's intended to be for supporting families. The state's that's right. This state safety net assistance is for childless couples, basically those without dependents. So cash assistance is intended to be for families, and so that's part of the large difference there.
Right.
The other thing is that the number of cases, it's families. I'm sorry, I forgot. You said the number of individuals versus the number of cases.
There's
Right.
two aspects
That's right.
to cash assistance, to temporary cash assistance. There's temporary assistance for needy families, which is federally funded.
The former AFDC
Yes.
post-welfare
That's
reform.
right.
And there's the safety net assistance, which is city and state funds.
Right.
And off that 360,000 that you said, an annual number was, HRI puts it closer to 500,000, but 490 something. And off that, this is to bear in mind, these reforms that have been put into place only apply to about 80,000 people, because the rest of them, children, elders, people with disabilities, seniors, and just people with disabilities, it doesn't apply to them because they're not required to participate in work programs. The roughly 80,000 or so of them, another 27,000 are either employed part-time or work minimum wage jobs that they don't make enough to get by. So
Yeah, I was going to say the simple answer also was that it's cases. I'm sorry, the number you said was cases versus individuals. The answer is actually super easy. I apologize. Yeah.
The numbers get confusing, of course. I hope I didn't confuse them.
Right.
But part of the mayor's plan has been to reevaluate how the city approaches these things, and I think we're still in the middle of that evaluation process. Do you feel like we now see Mayor de Blasio's policy on training, on education, on welfare receipt, or is that still evolving?
So one thing I'm really interested in getting is the actual education and training data. I would love to know how many GRE enrollees are we GED enrollees for people who didn't finish high school now going back to finish. How many people are enrolling? What do the on-time success rates look like? Because then this bump in the cash assistance rolls, if it could be explained by a rise in successful a temporary rise,
right.
but a rise in successful GED completions or enrollments right now, then that certainly would be heartening. But right now, we're not able to substantiate that. So there's sort of a burden of proof on the city that if they're changing the method, if they're changing the way the cash assistance program works, they should supplement that with data to show that it truly is a harmless bump and not the start of a bad trend.
I'd say you have to wait till the end of the year. That's their
End of this calendar year.
Yeah, and till December 31st this year. That's their timeline. That's their timeline for implementing not only these significant changes, but a slew of other measures that have been sort of all dovetail into this huge program, this huge overhaul, including legal eviction services or anti-eviction services, and help with phasing out, giving work study programs to CUNY students, and a bunch of other measures, which all will, well, that's what Steve Banks claims, HR Commissioner Banks claims, will come to fruition by the end of the year, and that's when their biennial employment plan, which they submit to the state. That's the time frame for it.
So we're obviously all wonks as our viewers are learning to their terror. Let's step back from that for a second and talk politics, if we can, a little bit, because Mayor de Blasio, from the moment he was elected, has labored under this idea that he was a traditional tax and spend liberal. Crime was going to go up, welfare was going to go up. This is John Lindsay reincarnate. Does it strike you as odd that he's taken the political risk of allowing welfare rolls to rise? Do we think he'll pay a political price for that?
I certainly think the mayor wouldn't want to brag about a rise in welfare cases. It's sort of ending the tale of two cities is not consistent with a rise in welfare cases.
How so?
So if you're trying to improve people's lives, I don't think people mostly aspire to being dependent on a cash assistance program. And so that's sort of not a means to ending that's not creating mass opportunity and mass participation in society if you're not in the workforce.
And what do you think, Samar? Political price to be paid?
Like you said, the tale of two cities. If the city can say it's helping more people, then I think that Mayor de Blasio is on the right track. If that's what he wants to say. If he wants to say we're helping the poorest of the poor, the people who are most disadvantaged in the city, the people who don't have work, don't have food. I think if he can say, look at how many people we've given assistance to, I think that's what he wants to go for. And bear in mind, they will still say enrollment annually is flat.
So last point is that this summer, I think, is the 20th anniversary of federal welfare reform. And I wonder what either of you think about the discussion we're having here, the changes de Blasio is making. What does that say about the success or failure of those reforms? Is that some commentary on what the feds did two decades ago?
I think we're still enjoying the benefits of that. We're not back to the bad old days right now. You can look up maps of the concentration of cash assistance between the early 1990s and now. So the mayor has not reversed entirely, at least not yet, the gains of federal welfare reform. And so I think that reflects relatively positively on it, that it has been durable despite changes in the mayoralty.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned it, because it's coming up in the presidential elections as well.
Yes.
The welfare reforms, particularly on the Democratic side, where presidential candidate Hillary Clinton had been criticized for this welfare system that was rigorous, has been criticized by some progressive people. So it's tough to say. I mean, I don't have the level of policy experience to comment on this, I'd say, but it's definitely going to be something to look for in the next couple of months. Continuing
down this line, I've worked with my colleague Oren Cass at the Manhattan Institute. He put out a paper on wage subsidies, on the idea of federal wage subsidies, basically encouraging people to enter the labor force, but also supporting them at a better wage. It's important. Everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to provide opportunity and get people able to participate fully in society. And we think that the state potentially has a role there. It's just we want it to be consistent with good incentives.
And so that research and yours can be found on manhattaninstitute.org.
Right.
GothamGazette.com. Thank you both so much for coming. Very important topic. We hope to have you back to discuss maybe after December 31st when we can see the changes in full.
Of course. Thanks.